Walt Disney called them his 9 old men, a core group of animators who were with him from the 1930s onward. The name began as a joke, a reference to what President Roosevelt called the Supreme Court of the day. But by the 1950s, when this picture was taken, Walt's 9 old men were involved in just about everything that made Disney, Disney. They were extraordinary artists. They were also husbands and fathers. 7 of them had children, and although Eric Larson and Mark Davis didn't, they were almost like uncles to some of us. One of the 9, Frank Thomas, was my dad. I'm Ted, his son. When people learn about the 7 families, it often leads to a question. What was it like growing up with our talented fathers? Well, there's no short answer to that for me. And even though I've known several of the other children most of my life, I'm not really sure how they would answer that. I'd have to ask them. So I did. The whole way this project kind of got started was the idea of, I keep being asked again and again when I do interviews about how charmed my childhood must have been, and wasn't it magical,
I'm laughing because... Yeah.
Oh, yes. I thought it was pretty cool that I had friends whose dads worked for NASA, and they thought it was really cool that my dad worked for Walt Disney.
You bet.
Mm-hmm. No, we had a really ordinary childhood that way. I mean, there was a sense of it being really cool, but to ourselves, I was really proud of my dad.
Charmed is a pretty good word. I might use privileged in a quiet kind of way.
I do. Yes, I had a charmed childhood. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Ward Kimball was such an original. I don't know how he had enough hours in the day to do animation and his own art and restore and collect horseless carriages and restore 2 steam engines and have a small railroad, like 300 feet of track that he called the Grizzly Flats Railroad, and raise 3 kids. Kelly, John, and Chloe. Was it your family's house or was it Ward's house?
Well,
it was mostly Ward's house.
well, let's put it this way. Ward thought of it as his house, and yet we as a family thought it was our house.
Right, we thought of it.
Especially in the early days, everything was treated as a family.
This is my mom holding my little sister, Chloe. This is John. This is me. And this is Ward.
Every family should have their own locomotive, don't you think?
You're right. Well, when we grew up, we didn't think it was that unusual.
One of the driving areas that always comes back to me is the dining room table. This is where everything happened. Mm-hmm. And it was like, sure, it would get used to eat from occasionally, but mostly it was covered with projects that we were all involved in. There were all these art projects and building projects and messy stuff and things all over the table and on the floor. And my dad would be there doing stuff. Occasionally my mother did too. This was the evening's entertainment. There was no TV.
They used to have these art classes, and it wasn't just people at Disney. 1 or 2 people from Disney would come, but it would be artists who lived in the area.
Would come over to your family's place?
Come over to my family's place. I would sit down and draw stuff, but these were some that he did.
That Ward did?
That Ward did. This was a babysitter for us. They would just call somebody or get somebody to come over and pose.
And this would be, this salon would be like once a week?
Maybe when it first started, it was once a week, and then maybe once a month. Sometimes there would be a jam session afterwards, kind of like a party. They just had a lot of fun. Even though he didn't consider this artwork at all, I think this is some of his best, work, is portrait work.
So this was the environment that you grew up?
Right.
Yeah.
This is the environment that we all grew up in.
Johnny Lounsbury was a quiet man who probably went through more pencils than words. The other thing I remember about him is that he moved his family out of the city. I never knew the Lounsbury kids, Ken, Andrea, and Jake. We got together at Ken's law office so I could find out more about their country upbringing.
The last thing that anyone would ever accuse him of being is argumentative. It wasn't his nature. Yet I became a lawyer. Jake went to law school. Your husband went to law school.
And my son is a lawyer.
Yes, that's right.
I know.
Yeah. So where did all that come from?
We couldn't draw.
I hate to think.
Yeah. And Jake said it right. We couldn't draw. The valley at that point was orange groves and alfalfa fields. Dad drove 25 miles one way to get to the studio on surface streets. Wouldn't you say that moving out to Chatsworth was part of a plan to subject us to farm life?
Oh, that's what I got.
We didn't know anything different.
Yeah, I was too young.
I mean, the chickens, there was a purpose for the chickens, and we had a season of chickens, then there was going to be a butchering day. When we had a season for a couple of lambs, then that would also be something we would have to face up to. And he wasn't afraid to handle new projects. He would go to the auction and pick up a mare that he seemed to like and bring it home. And we had no idea she was in foal. One morning, what happened?
Yep, dropped a little colt.
We had to work hard to find friends, right? My best friend was a cat and a chicken. My chicken Blondie. we had Bantam chickens and other fowl. This was a waterer. You put a mason jar up here with water and...
Oh, it went here in the middle and
Right.
flow it out.
And you would show your animals, get blue ribbons, and then take them to the auction and sort of compete for the top price for your steer.
Right.
This is what I did.
Oh my gosh, you did jumping?
Mm-hmm. Dad was very, very accepting at one of the kids if they wanted to try something new.
By the time I came around, we got into go-karts and racing go-karts and stuff. And then I don't think you ever got into that. Mm-mm. So he was amenable to just about anything that was fun.
Yeah.
Liked fun.
This is the letter I received when I was in college. And in the letter, he makes it from the dog that we had at the time, a pug dog named Wimpy, telling a story about what's going on at home.
And he ate at the dinner table with us.
Yes, he did.
Really?
He had his own chair, if you can imagine.
Who did he sit next to?
Me.
You. He was very polite.
I would feed him with a fork on occasion. He had his own plate.
The person who made a living as an animator does with his hands, he seemed completely indifferent to stringing barbed wire, medicating large animals,
Laying bricks,
pouring concrete. He was sort of a Renaissance worker. And yet he could still do this imaginative stuff with his fingertips.
Milt Call was a superb draftsman, a man of strong feelings and unvarnished opinions. He was originally from the San Francisco area, and he returned there when he retired. That's where I got together with his daughter, Sybil.
My father was probably one of the biggest characters anybody would want to meet. He was quite not the family man, but here he was stuck with these two kids, and he made the best of it. But he always had a wonderful time no matter what he did. And as we got older, he really, really got to be a good father and good friends to us.
So, your dad lived here?
Yes, he lived up in the middle from 1977, I guess, till he died in 1987.
And that whole family album thing was done?
Yes, the one that Disney did earlier. That was his bedroom window just to the left of the top deck. And he had his studio set up there, big table, and that's where he did all the wire sculpture.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when he retired.
He was masterful at that.
Yeah, he was. He was really good at it. He really liked it. He had to like what he was doing.
I had the sense that anything he was going to do, he was going to do well.
Yes, he was. Well, if he didn't do it well, though, he wasn't going to do it. Always he came home and got out the newspaper and made a drink, both he and my mother, and if it was summer, they had the tall guys, and he was always next to the porch door, and she was in the other chair, and I was on the floor, and my brother and I would usually get on the floor, and we'd be drawing or something, or playing games or something, and he'd have the classical music on. And it was really a nice evening, and we let the parakeet out. We had a parakeet named Skeezix who was very well trained and fly all over the house. And Skeezix liked to come and sit on my father's drink and dip his head in it and drink. So he and my father would have a drink while my father would open the paper, get his pen, and do the crossword puzzle. And he did it every night in pen.
Well, now, did you and your brother feel that your home life was special at all when you were growing up?
No. As a matter of fact, I don't know how Pete felt really, but I was kind of envious of my girlfriends and my peer group because their fathers were firemen and policemen and engineers, you know, but mostly they were of the labor people, you know, and they would sell things or make neat things, you know. My dad was just an animator, you know, and it was like...
well, if you can encapsulate that, what was it like to grow up with this man?
I probably had a very charmed life, and you know, because he wasn't really into little kids that much, he left us to be, and we grew up to be really nice kids. We were good kids, and you know, he didn't have much patience with us, so he didn't want to deal with, you know, all this mundane stuff about discipline. And my mother, I don't think ever said, wait till your father gets home, because she knew when he got home he wasn't going to do anything except probably spank both of us, because he didn't want to hear whose fault anything was. All he wanted to know was that we were going to be quiet, and this was the end of it.
Right, so he'd punish you both.
Yeah, so we both got punished, no matter what.
Well, I'm just wondering, obviously our fathers worked at Disney, and it was Disney Monday through Friday, but was there much Disney around your house?
No, no. We did a Disney thing for birthdays. And my brother and I probably had the world's greatest birthdays that any kid could ever want.
Les Clark started with Walt in 1927, the week after he finished high school. He didn't have any formal art training when he began those first Mickey Mouse cartoons, but for the next 48 years, he kept learning. This time I headed to Arizona. Les's daughter Mary is an artist who paints the Southwest where she lives. We got together in Scottsdale at the gallery that shows her work.
When I was about 5, I would give my dad a string every day as he was leaving for work. And I would say, Dad, catch me a horse on the lot. And he'd say, okay, Mary. And he'd bring me back a pack of juicy fruit gum. So that was my horse. But I had faith that somewhere on the lot there would be a horse loose. And he would be able to catch it.
Running around the studio lot.
Yeah, running around the studio lot, and he would be able to nab that horse for me and bring it home. I started painting on location at graduate school. And we went out in March. I had a board and my paints, and I perched on a rock. It was freezing cold, and there were storms blowing in, but it was the most exhilarating experience. My dad, he used palette knife a lot, so I got to where I found that palette knife was a wonderful way to express myself in painting these paintings, because you could get a feeling of the wildness of the country that you really can't get with a brush.
You know, what impresses me is that here's a guy who was known for animation, which is a very detailed...
Very tedious, yes.
And very precise. And these are wonderfully loose and strong and very muscular.
And I think that's what he really enjoyed, was the diversity of being able to do things that were strong and that were that would communicate with the viewer in an entirely different way than the animation.
And when would he paint? He'd come home from the studio after working there all day?
All day. And he would go and he would take classes, and they would have a model, and he would paint until 10 or 11 at night.
There's a story to this painting that's over your shoulder, isn't there?
There is. Yes. I was about 14 years old, and my dad was busy doing portraits and learning how to do portraits, and he liked to use me as a model. And he had that great big wicker chair that you see, and I got to dress up and sit in that chair and pose for him.
You'd do it in multiple sessions?
Multiple sessions, yes, and I would usually bribe him for an ice cream in between.
How many ice cream cups did this end up being?
Quite a few. I was pretty greedy.
I'm curious, how long did it take?
He worked on that probably at least a year. And this really wasn't finished. I mean, it's still a work in progress. There was always a feeling of things that were creative in our home. You know, things that you could do that were fun and were, the child is welcome to do those things.
Wooly Reitherman was a master of dramatic action and comedy. My childhood memory of him is of a big man with an easygoing confidence. After World War II, he almost became an airline pilot, but a lunch with Walt convinced him to come back to the studio. A drive along the coast to Santa Barbara got me together with his sons Bruce, Bob, and Dick, and his granddaughter, Millie.
Bob kind of is the keeper of Dad's art outside of the Disney environment especially. I'm kind of the keeper of the family memorabilia, and Dick is the keeper of the stories and deep memory, the deep institutional memory of the family.
And the secret documents.
Right.
The genesis of the conspiracy theories. Tell me about this shot was taken at Ollie and Marie Johnston's, wasn't it?
This is Bob, the guy with the pointed head there. And this is me, Mom, and Dad.
Defend yourself, Bob.
Come on.
Some of us never got out of the whole Seven Dwarfs thing.
Oh, boy. He was
I wasn't there. Were one of you guys when he gave the guy the shirt off his back?
Oh, yeah.
You were there.
I was there, yeah, at Alphonse's. The family was in there for a dinner one Sunday evening, I think. And there was a fellow, a couple of guys at a table next to ours who admired the shirt that Dad had on. And he was a perfect stranger. And they, you know, chit-chatted for maybe all of 30 seconds. And Dad was like, well, if you like it so much, let's go. I'll swap you right now. He went back in the bathroom and came out, you know, 30 seconds later. And they were wearing the opposite shirts. And the guy kind of didn't know what hit him, to be honest. He didn't quite know what to make of the whole thing. But that was not unlike my dad. He wasn't afraid to, he didn't filter himself a whole lot. And if he wanted to do something, he wouldn't let the idea that it was a little odd stop him from doing it. That was just not going to happen. You know, with Dad's early flying days with his brother Al, you know, it's not quite Wright brothers, but it's only 15, 20 years after. It's still early days. And they would build their own plane, literally sort of in the garage. And then they would fly this thing around, you know, with the goggles, and it was an open cockpit plane, and throwing water balloons at neighbors and, you know, his sister, his older sister, who might be walking, you know, the dog on the sidewalk. They'd come in over the, you know, the mayor's house and make a steep left at the church and toss out a couple of water balloons as they went down Sierra Madre Avenue. And
did any of you pick up flying?
Well, he let us, not officially.
You mean a license? He started to fly without a license.
But he taught us airplane safety. It's like being around a horse. There's certain things, and he was very, you know, he knew it could get you killed and it was okay. Just injured.
What did your mom think about this stuff?
I think she had already reconciled herself to a lot of danger and risk.
She was quite happy to have us. I mean, she loved my dad tremendously and had a tremendous, I think, respect for his, you know, common sense in taking care of us, but in giving us a life that was worth living.
Frank Thomas was known for combining artistry and sincere acting. At the studio, he and his lifelong friend Ollie Johnston were called Frank and Ollie. Just as important to me, Frank was my father, and at home, we called him Dad. This is the house that my parents designed and built, and we grew up in. Being in it still says a lot about what my father was like. And so I got together with my older brother Greg for a kind of house tour.
Dad was at the head of the table.
Right.
Mom was over here. I was across from her. Ann was next to me, and you sat over here next to Mom.
Right.
Doug wasn't born yet. We had his chair.
11 years later.
For a year before they built, he'd come out different times of day and see where did the sun come up. So he knew how he wanted to set the house.
15 feet is too far from a fireplace to enjoy it. 12.5 feet to 13 feet is ideal. 14 feet from the chest of the sitter to the fire is too far.
Which means he had to find fireplaces and sit certain distances from them.
I'm sure he did. He was doing this at the same time that he was playing in the Firehouse 5.
Right.
He had 3 little kids. He was working on Peter Pan. And in the middle of it all, he got pneumonia.
That's right.
And so he put it in the baby book. I mean, he was gone from the studio probably 6 weeks, 8 weeks. When Frank had the house designed, this was going to be his studio. This is, right? I mean, it had north light, beautiful windows over there.
It was the family room. He built the animation table, but...
It was never a studio till we left home.
Right.
You remember this? This
solar system.
This is all that's left of it, you know. This was, for those of you at home, this, Frank did reading on astronomy, and he wanted to get a better sense of the scale of the solar system. So he built a solar system in our living room.
And he knew down the road, deep within, that his boys would destroy it. And we did not.
Or we might appreciate it.
We appreciated destroying it.
I've got something to show you.
Oh my word. That's the rocket I built. Ted and I, with Ollie and Marie Johnston's boys, Ken and Rick, talked Dad into filming a rocket movie.
The planets that had been here had a second life in the film when we were flying.
We filmed in the Johnston's garage, got it blacked out, and hung the planets down.
Yeah.
They were made out of styrofoam balls, I remember.
The big ones.
The big ones,
Neptune
yes.
and Saturn. Ollie Johnston always wanted to know what his character was thinking and feeling. He was the other half of Frank and Ollie. He was also our neighbor. Living next door to each other, the Johnstons and Thomases were almost like an extended family. Their older son, Rick, and my brother are the same age, and their second son, Ken, and I were born 4 months apart. But they had the train, and we Thomases joked that we lived on the wrong side of the tracks. Dad, this is early on.
Yeah, Rick back when he had braces.
How come you're not wearing a tie?
I have no idea. I'd be actually more likely to wear a tie right now than Rick would, so I don't think Rick would ever put a tie on anymore.
I don't think I've ever seen Rick in a tie.
Yeah.
The first time I was ever in the car driving through the suburbs and looking at houses really close together, I said, well, where do they keep their train? It's kind of like all this stuff that I had that nobody else had, all just seemed, well, everybody does this, don't they?
But this is the two of you, yeah?
Yeah, yeah.
So you're all saddled up even
Yeah.
at that age.
Well, I mean, you can see that these trains were, basically we were born into the trains.
Oh, here's one of those train parties.
Yeah, yeah. Another birthday party. Rick used to always kind of hang out with Dad running the train and helping him, and I used to climb up in trees and pretend like I was an Indian.
He'd ambush people as the train went by?
Yeah, and fall out of the tree when Dad would shoot at me.
We were probably a little more popular than we would have been just on our
We
own.
both tell that same story.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we would borrow the camera or the projector from your dad and show Disney movies. You know, so at our birthday party, you'd have the train and then a Disney movie, so it, you know, we were, that right there creates quite a bit of popularity.
Yeah, that was the hot ticket.
Yeah.
Was your home life what you'd call regular, irregular?
Well, Dad was pretty structured, you know. I mean, when we would go out to eat, Dad would get out to pull the car out to go to the restaurant about 25 minutes before we actually needed to leave. And then Rick and I would show up at the car about 5 to 10 minutes before we actually needed to leave. And Mom would show up right when we needed to leave. And Dad was usually irritated with her at that point because he considered leaving on time as late.
We used to get illustrated bedtime stories. I think he would spend his lunch hour doing all these watercolors, and then at night he would tell us a story, usually one he made up, and he'd have a picture for each scene.
The teacher went around and asked everybody what they wanted to be when they grew up. And she got to me and I said, I want to be a dog. And, you know, because I was thinking of 101 Dalmatians or, you know, all the different characters that we had, you know, been throughout the time that Dad had done. And she goes, well, you know, I don't think you can be a dog, Ken. And I said, no, I've been a dog a number of times already, you know, because Dad would do those little chalk talks, and he'd make up these little stories where Rick would be a rabbit and I'd be a squirrel or something, and I'd basically go to school the next day in character.
Right. There's a certain age where your parents are gods, and you know everything they say you accept without question. We pulled up to a stoplight, and the light turned green, and I said, "Dad, the light's green, go, go." And he says, "I always like to wait a second before." And just then, a lady coming towards us started to pull out, and somebody ran a red light and smashed into her. And she was okay. You know, there was no injuries or anything, but it was kind of like, here, let me illustrate my point.
Right. I mean, with Dad, you always felt like you were a character in a story.
Do you remember what your dad carried around in his pockets?
Obviously, we're struggling to remember.
A nail clipper. And he carried that a lot, and he used it a lot because of his drawing.
I don't think that he carried much. I probably just his keys and his wallet and maybe a comb, but he didn't have a lot of need for that.
That's interesting that you would ask that.
Thimbles. He always had thimbles in his pocket to play the washboard. He'd walk through the room and you can hear him popping the thimbles in his pocket with his fingers.
He always had a hanky. He always had a clean hanky in his pocket, which may seem like a small thing, but when you're kids that get messy or you get a bloody nose or something, that clean hanky came to the rescue a bunch. So it's that kind of a...
Let's term that a handkerchief instead of a hanky.
Okay, excuse me.
Don't even know if he went around with a handkerchief.
He carried pliers a lot. Pliers were always in his pocket.
Oh, yes, he had silver coins in his pockets, and he used to put his hands in his pockets, and the coins would jingle, and I loved the sound of it. And when he would walk, he would jingle these coins in his pockets. That is a strange question. Did your dad have something in his pockets?
My father kept the world in his pockets. I'm curious, what kind of car did your dad drive?
The first car I remember was the Woody station wagon. That was the family car.
And we kept that until you could see through the holes in the bottom of the...
You could see the road going by.
1951 Chevrolet pickup truck, forest green, because that's the only color they made the truck in.
We had a Studebaker.
Right.
Because he said that particular model was in the Museum of Modern Art.
You know, those things that looked in a way like giant Volkswagens. And it was, even though I think it was new, the paint was already like that flat blue, blackboard kind of texture.
Right.
And then we had a Plymouth, remember that?
He had a 1954 fiery red with white leather seats Thunderbird. Yes, convertible with a black top.
They got a Thunderbird. I remember that.
I finally got old enough where I could take a date out in that, you know. And
didn't last long, they got rid of it.
Dad had a really nice Dodge Dart GT, and Mom had the biggest station wagon Ford made.
It was huge.
And I said, "Can I learn to drive in your car?" And he goes, "Nope."
It was called a Curtis 100 custom car. He loved to go out in the Mojave Desert on the roller coaster road and just run that thing. It got up. You could get it up easy around 150, and that thing would just take off.
The Corvair, you know, where Ralph Nader, unsafe at any speed. Well, my dad fixed that. He goes to the building supply place and he gets a 90-pound bag of gravel and puts it in the front. Well, if you weight the front down, it doesn't water ski on you when it goes through the puddles.
He finally got a Porsche. After that, he got a 911, and it wasn't really as good of a beautiful car. Sure, it would go faster.
I like the bathtub porch better.
You actually remembered the phone number for the studio.
I know, isn't that funny? What a funny thing. It's important to know how to call your dad, I guess.
During the 50s, Dad would have us come out with Mom, a couple times during the summer and have lunch with him. And then he'd take us around and show us what he was working on.
You come in the weekends and you walk up those big stairs of the animation building, the big aluminum frame doors, and you look down the hall, shiny linoleum, right? With linoleum that goes up to the side for the molding.
Shiny linoleum.
Long hallways filled with lots of pictures from all the films.
You know, the rubber bands at the studio. You put a whole bunch of them together and put them between two doors. She had a slingshot down the hall. In those days, there were metal cars, no plastic cars. The goal was to try and get it to the end, whether it was on its wheels or not, and smack into the end of the door. So I go down, it smacks, door opens, and there's Walt Disney. He walks in, hello.
They were working on Lady and the Tramp. My dad was working on the scene in the cellar. And I remember packing a little lunch and going with him. And I would find a place under the moviola with my little sketch pad.
I remember going to the studio with Dad and sitting at a neighboring office with the board in front of me, and I get the paper out and put it in, and I get the pencil, and I thought something was going to happen. Nothing happened.
It wasn't the flipping.
It wasn't the flipping. It was that Dad of ours.
So this has been here, well, since your dad lived here, right?
Yeah.
You been through it? You know it's...
No, I haven't seen it.
May I?
Yes. You may. I can't wait. There's probably nothing in it.
Oh, there's something in it.
Whoa.
So this has been here...
Oh my goodness, I think this is the Marc Chagall or...
You're kidding.
Yeah,
You have
I know.
Chagall's in your garage.
Yeah, well, you know, he and Phyllis, his second wife, used to go over to England and France, and Dad would fish, and she'd run off and see. She'd run off and say hello to Picasso. No, seriously, she knew them all. Yeah, yeah. Oh, look at it. It says a Mickey for Nicky. Lots of love, Grandpa Milt. My son's been wanting to find these. That's Walt Disney's signature to my son, Eric. He will be totally thrilled to have found this.
He hasn't seen them in like...
Oh, 3 of them? No.
Yeah, 3.
Oh, my gosh. You know, he hasn't seen them forever. What fun.
Well,
I'm going to stick these in the car.
excellent.
This painting is a painting of Georgia, and she was my second mother and an absolutely wonderful woman. I was privileged in my life to have 2 moms, and it is also an accumulation of everything that my dad worked for in his art. His earlier work had things that were a searching mechanism to find, you know, the true beauty of his subject. But in this painting, he brought it all together. To me, this painting has a soul. It's precious.
Well, it's remarkable. It's why we make art.
Yes,
It really is.
it truly is.
One of the last dreams I had about my dad when he was so ill, before he passed away, was that I was in tears because he was leaving for good. I'd never see him again. And he says, "Don't worry, here, I have a gift for you." And I was amazed at the dream when I woke up, because what he gave me was a bunch of pencils and brushes and things. And it was like, that's not enough. I want you back. But I thought it was very symbolic.
He visited you here.
Yeah. He visited about 4 times, I think. The very first time he ever saw this place, he sat in that couch right over there and he said, "I wish I could still draw because I would paint those mountains if I could."
And it's like this every day, right?
Well, it's always there, you just can't see it.
It's always there, you just can't see it. Rick was talking about the foggy Pacific Northwest. But maybe it was the warm sunshine of a beautiful day, or the way I was getting pulled back into my own memories.
Move it this way.
I began to see his words in a different way.
There we go. Oh, yeah.
In a funny way, that view of forest and water became like the things our fathers give us or leave behind. Some tangible, some personal. They're always there. We just can't see them. And then, now and again, there's a clear day.